We're going to finish our discussion about claims by focusing on causal claims, and then we're going to sort of pull everything together for the three different claims. So it's more important that you be able to distinguish these rather than that you say this is one or be able to only see one by itself. So with causal claims, we have an argument that one variable causes changes in the level of another variable. Those causal claims should occur in the context of an experiment. So studies with a manipulated variable and a measured variable. So some examples. To appear more intimidating, just tilt your head down. Unbelievable news, read it again and you might think it's true. Family meals curb teen eating disorders. What you'll notice with each of these is that they have different kinds of verbs that are being used rather than some of the ones that we saw earlier for either frequency or association claims. These are things like increases, trims, adds, promotes, reduces, prevents, fights, worsens, distracts, suggesting that there is a cause and a causal relationship between these two variables. Even when there's tentative language like may curb or sometimes makes, we're still making a causal claim. Now, here is one figure that showed up in the New York Times, and they're pointing out the number of mass shootings in developed countries, but over a 20-year period, 21-year period. Think about what sort of claim would be made here. Is this frequency, association, or causal? You might also think about what kinds of concerns you might have about these data. So you might turn off the video, think about these things, and then start it up again. This is actually making a frequency claim. I think there are a number of different concerns we might have. We don't know if some of the difference is that the United States is much bigger than some of the other countries. We don't know if it's changed across time. We don't know how or know even whether they're what definition of mass shootings they're using. Here is a second figure with much the same data, although presented somewhat differently. Here they're looking at homicide rates in rich countries. And so we're looking at GDP per capita and the number of gun homicides per million. Notice how we're scaling it here, and we're able to distinguish between things in a somewhat different way. Think about what sort of claim could be made here. Why did they only include relatively wealthy countries? And why were they looking, or why did they include different rates of GDP, gross domestic product? What other differences are there in this chart that make it more, understandable? Again, you can turn your video off and think about these issues. This is, in fact, an association claim, that there is this relationship between wealth, or between looking at wealth and gun homicides over this period. One of the things we'll talk about later in the semester is that the United States is an outlier here, which changes the nature of the correlation, makes it look like there's a stronger correlation than it is, and maybe even a different kind of correlation, because without the United States, With the United States, it looks like a positive correlation. Without it, maybe it's a negative correlation, right? They may have used only relatively wealthy countries to remove some of the confounds and to be able to make clearer comparisons here. And certainly one of the things that I like is that they're standardizing the number of gun homicides per million. So even when the data are presented this way, as opposed to in the last figure, it appears that the United States is far different from other countries in how many homicides there are relative to the population. Note that this is talking about homicide rates, and the last figure was looking only at mass shootings. Here is the a web article talking about Paquin et al.'s research, and they conclude that men who owned cats as kids may have higher psychosis rates or risk. So growing up in the same household as a pet cat may enhance the risk of experiencing a psychotic episode later in life, but only for men. According to a new study, this increased likelihood of mental illness could be caused by a common parasite called Toxoplasmosis gondii, which can be transmitted to humans who come into contact with cat poop. Think about the kind of claim that they made, and think about, how do you know it? And what sort of claims should they have made? Again, turn off the video, spend a minute thinking about this, and then turn it back on. So this is a causal claim that they make. May have higher psychosis risk. They probably should have made an association claim. So talking about tending, for example, or associated with. They are not, for example, assigning children to homes with cats or without cats. Now, not all claims are based on research. Some claims are based on experience, intuition, or authority. So, for example, the Forgotten Mothers and Babies of Zika is an article by CNN. Or guys reveal how they found their therapists, from Yahoo Life. These are things that the articles themselves do not include any data. Now, I'm going to just point to a number of resources that are on D2L. I want you to think about what is, go back to the PowerPoint, because in most cases, I'm not going to give you a variety of different places or different examples. There's more in the PowerPoint on D2L. So what kind of claim is made in this headline? Voodoo dolls prove it. Hunger makes couples turn on each other. Turn off your video and think about this and turn it back on. So they're making a causal claim here. And let's look at the study. Researcher Brad Bushman recruited 107 couples for a study. He taught them how to measure their blood sugar, and then he sent each volunteer home with something unusual, a voodoo doll and 51 pins. The participants were told that the doll represented their spouse, and that every night before they went to bed, they should stab the doll with pins depending on how angry they were with their spouse. The more pins they put in the doll, the angrier they were with the spouse. After 3 weeks, Bushman and his team assessed the damage done to each doll. Volunteers who had low levels of blood glucose stuck more pins in the voodoo dolls than those who had high levels of blood glucose. Think about, is this causal headline justified? Turn off your video, turn it back on when you have an answer. And I would argue that in this case, the causal headline is not justified. That in fact, this appears to be an association between the number of pins and the levels of blood glucose. And we are not randomly assigning people to groups. We just do not have enough data here to make that kind of conclusion. There are a couple more examples on the PowerPoint in D2L. I'm just going to point you to this. Again, you can find this on D2L. I want you to practice identifying claims and variables. Is it a claim? Is it frequency, association, or cause? For each claim, state the variable or variables at the conceptual level, and then at the operational level. So how might it be operationalized? And then think about what kind of study would be needed to support this kind of claim. So, think about, this is what I want you to be pulling together. And you have a number of different kinds of examples that you can play with here. Okay. Take care. We're going to be looking at validity associated with claims in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.